When my neighbor Karen tore down my fence claiming it blocked her access, I thought she'd lost her mind. But when her arrogance crossed the line, I found the perfect revenge, buying the very strip of land she thought she owned. And that's when the real battle began. I've lived in my house for nearly 8 years, long enough to know that neighborhoods have their own rhythms, quirks, and little unspoken rules. My street is one of those places where lawns are mowed with near-military precision. People wave when they drive by, even if they've forgotten your name, and every spring, the same handful of neighbors coordinate their garage sales like it's a military campaign. It's a comfortable, predictable place, or at least it was before Karen moved in. Karen showed up 2 summers ago, buying the house next door after its previous owners decided to downsize. At first, she seemed harmless enough. A woman in her mid-50s with short blonde hair that looked like it had been sprayed into place with industrial adhesive, a loud laugh that could cut through a brick wall, and a way of speaking that made even compliments sound like warnings. She introduced herself the week she moved in by knocking on my door unannounced and handing me a tray of brownies, which turned out to be made with carob instead of chocolate. A discovery that would have been merely disappointing if she hadn't spent 10 minutes explaining how real chocolate was basically poison. I tried to keep things friendly. You have to, in neighborhoods like ours. But over the months, little things started to creep in. She complained that my maple tree was dropping leaves on her side of the yard. She left a note in my mailbox suggesting I tone down my holiday lights because they distracted drivers. She once knocked on my door to tell me my lawn sprinkler was too aggressive, which I didn't even know was a measurable quality. The fence was the last thing I thought we'd have an issue over. It wasn't new. It had been there when I bought the house. A sturdy, weathered cedar fence 6 feet tall, running exactly along the property line as confirmed by the survey I'd kept in my files. It marked the boundary cleanly and had never been a problem for the previous neighbors. To me, it was simply part of the landscape. To Karen, apparently, it was a personal affront. The trouble began on a bright Saturday morning in late April. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard the unmistakable whine of a power tool coming from the side yard. It wasn't a lawnmower or hedge trimmer, it was sharper, angrier. I stepped out onto my deck and froze. Karen was in my yard, not on her side of the fence, in my yard. She was wearing neon pink gardening gloves and oversized sunglasses, holding a cordless reciprocating saw like she was starring in some low-budget home demolition show. And the fence? My fence? Half of it was already gone. I walked across the yard, my coffee forgotten, my heart thumping in that slow, rising rhythm you get when you're trying not to immediately lose your temper. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. She looked up at me like I was the one intruding. "Oh, good morning. I'm just taking down this fence. It's blocking my access." "Your access to what?" "My property. I can't get to the side yard easily with this thing in the way. It's a hazard." I blinked at her. "It's not a hazard. It's on the property line. It's been here for over 20 years. Karen waved a dismissive hand. "Yes, well, property lines are negotiable. I've measured this myself. This fence is encroaching by at least 2 inches. I'm just fixing the problem." I stood there for a moment, my brain trying to process the sheer gall of that sentence. "Karen, you can't just come onto my property and cut down my fence." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, turning back to the saw. "I'm improving the neighborhood." That was when I pulled out my phone and started recording. Her tone changed a little after that, but she didn't stop. I told her point blank that if she didn't leave, I'd call the police. She actually rolled her eyes at me, and said, "Go ahead. They'll see I'm in the right." By the time I did call the police, half the fence was in pieces on the ground. 2 officers arrived about 15 minutes later, one of them clearly doing his best to keep a neutral expression while taking in the scene. Karen greeted them like she'd been expecting guests, explaining that she was restoring proper boundaries and removing a dangerous structure. The officers listened to both sides, then told her flatly that she couldn't just destroy someone else's property, regardless of whether she thought it was on her land. They suggested we take it up with a surveyor and, if necessary, a civil court. She left in a huff, muttering about how some people don't understand neighborly cooperation. I spent the rest of that weekend cleaning up the mess she'd made. The cedar panels were splintered beyond repair. Every time I picked up a broken board, I felt a hot knot of anger twist tighter in my chest. This wasn't just about a fence, it was about the principle of it. Karen had decided that what she wanted was more important than what was right. By Monday morning, I had already called my insurance company, a lawyer, and a licensed surveyor. I was determined to prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the fence had been exactly where it was supposed to be. The surveyor came out that Thursday, setting up his tripod and measuring gear while Karen stood on her porch sipping coffee and watching us like a hawk. When the results came back, they confirmed what I already knew. The fence was perfectly aligned with the property line. Not 2 inches off, not even one. Perfect. I thought that would be the end of it. I'd take her to small claims court for the cost of replacing the fence. She'd grumble about it, and eventually, things would go back to the quiet routine I'd enjoyed before she moved in. I didn't realize then that this was just the opening move in what would turn into a much bigger game, one that I would eventually win in a way she never saw coming. If I had known Karen was the type to treat the word no like a personal challenge, I might have handled that first incident differently. But after the surveyor's results came back and confirmed that the fence was never in her way, I figured she'd be embarrassed enough to back off. She wasn't. Over the next month, I started noticing little changes around my property. One morning, my garbage can had been moved several feet down the curb, technically still in front of my house, but close enough to hers that it looked like I'd forgotten where I lived. Another day, I found a pile of dead branches tossed neatly into my flower bed. And then there were the notes. Short, passive-aggressive messages left in my mailbox, written in all capital letters like a ransom letter from a bored kidnapper. Please keep your grass clippings on your lawn. The smell of your barbecue travels. Possible rat activity near your shed. Look into it. The most irritating part wasn't even the content of the notes. It was the fact that she never signed them, like we both didn't know exactly who had written them. I filed the paperwork to take her to small claims court for the cost of replacing the fence. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough that I wanted her to feel the sting. When the court date rolled around, she showed up with a manila folder stuffed with papers and a smug smile, as if she had uncovered some damning evidence. What she had, it turned out, was a handful of grainy photos of the fence taken before she destroyed it, and a printout of some real estate blog about common fence disputes. The judge wasn't impressed. He awarded me the cost of repairs plus court fees. Karen pursed her lips so tight I thought she might actually swallow them. I thought, again, that this would be the end of it. But if there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen, it's that they can't let a grudge go. It's like oxygen to them. Not 2 weeks later, she had a contractor show up to build a shed in her backyard, right against the property line. I knew exactly what she was doing. A little visual payback. She made a point of accidentally storing things just over the line. A lawnmower wheel, a stack of cinder blocks, once even an inflatable kiddie pool. The funny thing about these kinds of feuds is that they start to get into your head. You start noticing everything. I knew the sound of her car door closing, the rhythm of her footsteps on the driveway, even the way she coughed, sharp and fast, like she was trying to get your attention. I hated that I was letting her live rent. Free in my mind, but at the same time I wasn't going to roll over. One evening in late August, I was talking to my friend Mark over a couple of beers on my deck. Mark works in real estate and knows all the behind-the-scenes drama that never makes it to Zillow listings. I told him about Karen's latest antics, and he shook his head. You know, he said, a lot of people don't realize this, but sometimes property lines are weird. Like, you can own a strip of land someone else thinks is theirs. And if they're behind on taxes... He trailed off, giving me a look. What? I asked. Well, he said, lowering his voice even though there was no one else around. I've seen cases where a little sliver of land goes up for auction because of unpaid property taxes or a title mess. Usually no one bids on them except developers. But if you happen to own the strip along someone's property line... He let the implication hang there. I laughed it off at first. It sounded like something you'd read in a revenge fantasy thread online, not something that could actually happen. But the idea lodged itself in my brain like a seed. Over the next few weeks, I found myself casually researching how property tax auctions worked. That's when I stumbled on something interesting. The county had an online public map of all parcels of land, And sure enough, there was a tiny, oddly shaped strip of land running along the far side of Karen's property. It was barely wide enough to walk along without stepping on her grass, and I had always assumed it was just part of her lot. But according to the county map, it was actually a separate parcel. And here's the kicker. It was listed as delinquent on taxes. I felt a little jolt in my chest. Could it really be that easy? The auction was set for late October, and the minimum bid was less than what I'd spent replacing the fence she'd destroyed. I called Mark, who confirmed that if I bought that strip, it would legally be mine, and if Karen wanted to use it, she'd have to get my permission. The temptation was too much to resist. I didn't tell anyone except Mark what I was planning. I went to the auction in person, just in case there was some random competition, but the room was mostly empty. A few investors in polo shirts, a bored clerk at the desk, and the county auctioneer reading off property codes like they were bingo numbers. When my strip came up, no one else bid. I raised my hand, the gavel came down, and just like that, I owned the property line Karen thought was hers. I walked out of that building with the deed in my hand and the kind of giddy, slightly dangerous feeling you get when you realize you've just set the stage for a very satisfying piece of payback. But I knew enough to wait. If I was going to do this, I wasn't going to march over and announce it. No, I wanted Karen to discover it in the most inconvenient way possible. And as it turned out, I wouldn't have to wait long. I didn't have to wait more than 3 weeks before Karen gave me the perfect opening. It was early November, one of those sharp, windy days when the last of the leaves scrape along the pavement and you can smell someone's fireplace 2 blocks away. I was raking my front yard when I heard the whine of a motor from the side of her house. Peeking around the hedge, I saw Karen struggling to maneuver a delivery truck into her backyard. The truck driver looked annoyed, and for good reason. The truck couldn't fit through her side gate without crossing the strip of land I now owned. The gate opened directly onto it. He tried twice to angle the truck in, but each time, one of the wheels ended up squarely on my property. Karen, of course, waved him forward like she was directing an orchestra, oblivious, or maybe just unwilling, to see the problem. I leaned against my rake and called out, "Hey, Karen." She froze, then turned with that tight smile she reserved for moments when she absolutely didn't want to talk to me. "Yes?" "You're on my property." She laughed, like I had just told her the world's most unfunny joke. "Don't be ridiculous, this is my access." "Not anymore," I said, pulling an envelope from my jacket. "Bought it at auction. Guess who owns this little strip now?" Her face went pale in a way that made every frustrating month of this feud worth it. She snatched the paper from my hand and scanned it, her lips moving silently as she read. This is absurd. You can't own my access." "Oh, I can," I said. "And I do. Which means if you want to drive over it, you'll need my permission." I let the words hang there, sweet as honey. The truck driver, sensing the drama, decided he wanted no part of it. He muttered something about rescheduling and climbed back into his cab. Karen shouted after him, then turned on me with the kind of glare that could strip paint. "You won't get away with this," she hissed. "Karen," I said, smiling, "I got the deed from the county. I'm not getting away with anything. I'm just enforcing property boundaries. You know, the thing you're so passionate about." Over the next week, I installed a short, tasteful row of decorative planters along the edge of the strip. Nothing illegal, nothing gaudy, just enough to make it clear that it wasn't an open driveway anymore. I even planted winter pansies in them. They looked nice, and as a bonus, they made Karen grind her teeth every time she saw them. The planters turned out to be a bigger inconvenience than I imagined. Karen had apparently been using that side entrance for all sorts of things. Lawn deliveries, mulch drop-offs, even hauling out her garbage cans when she didn't feel like dragging them through her backyard. Now, every time she needed to move something bulky, she had to take it through her house or all the way around the block to the back alley. One afternoon in December, she knocked on my door. I opened it to find her standing there in a heavy coat, clutching a folder. "I've spoken to my lawyer," she said without greeting me. "We're going to challenge this." "Go for it," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "But you might want to check the tax records first. This parcel was delinquent for 6 years. You could have bought it yourself for $100, but you didn't." Her jaw tightened, and for a brief moment I thought she might actually apologize. Not for the fence, but for underestimating me. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked away. By February, the fight seemed to drain out of her. The angry notes stopped appearing. The passive-aggressive yard work stopped. She even started parking her car on the opposite side of her driveway so she didn't have to look at me when she got out. I replaced my fence in the spring, same cedar design as before, right on the property line. This time, though, I added a small sign on my side of the yard that read, "Private property. Access by permission only." It wasn't just for Karen, it was for me too. A reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting or arguing, it's playing the long game until the other person realizes they've been beaten at their own rules. The funny thing is, we still live next to each other. We still wave occasionally when passing in the driveway, but it's the stiff kind of wave you give someone you'll never invite over for dinner. And that's fine. Peace doesn't always mean friendship. Sometimes it just means boundaries. Literal legal boundaries. And every time I walk past that little strip of land I bought, I can't help but smile. Not just because I own it, but because I turned her own obsession with access into the thing that finally shut her down. In a world full of noise, we follow the quiet truth stories that reveal, awaken, and transform. If this story moved you, like, comment, and subscribe for more untold narratives that challenge perception and stir the soul. Hit the bell so you never miss when the compass points us to the next hidden truth. This is Hidden Compass Stories, where every story leads somewhere deeper.